Welcome back, everybody, to the Ready.ca public dispatch. This is number 2. My name's Joey. That's Mark, speaking in tongues reserved typically for, I suppose, tax evasion, to put it kindly. What's going on, buddy? Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Second week in. We'll see how we do this time. I'm live streaming for the first time. So
yes, sir. Yes, sir. Feels good. We got a trio of stories tonight. We'll start with, of course, residential school denialism in the news again. I hate the term, but let's watch just a couple of these short clips. I mean, this is nuts. I don't need to tell you that, but listener, viewer, have a listen to this and see what you think about this idea being floated by some people in the Aboriginal community.
The AFN is calling for residential school denialism to be criminalized. What is the BC government's position on that?
Yeah, thanks for the question. We have seen an unprecedented and terrible rise of residential school denialism in our legislature here in Victoria, and we as a government have solidly condemned it every time. We've reached out to organizations when it happens to make sure that the survivors that are hearing that type of painful rhetoric are supported. And we've also been calling on the federal government to take action through the criminal code related to addressing residential school denialism in our country. I'm happy to work with the minister related to that. And I appreciate that the AFN is taking such a strong stance. We as Canadians need to recognize how harmful denialism is, not only to survivors, but also to everybody in terms of acknowledging and denying the history of this country.
So this is an interesting starting point. There's one other brief clip I want to share before we talk about it, because I think it's important to note what exactly is being denied. Oftentimes, these proponents talk about the denial of schools, like residential school denialism means a certain thing if you just listen to the words, but oftentimes it's actually related to something like the Kamloops anomalies, right? Here's a fella who I think is a chief of some kind or some kind of tribe elder, talking to the media recently about why he thinks First Nations people shouldn't have to dig up Kamloops and should continue getting not only funding, but I mean, preferential treatment, let's call it what it is, around residential schools and these, alleged atrocities.
We're asked if it's possible to exhume graves all over this nation. 133 residential schools. At least 100,000 of our people were in these residential schools. Thousands of them did not make it home. No account of what happened to them, no account of how they died, and no account of where they were laid to rest. And I don't think we should have to prove to anybody what happened to these people, because they are there. And they send us messages telling us they're there. And Chief Cashmere and I went to visit the sacred site. You can tell they're there, right? Feel the power and the energy. For somebody that's not from our communities, that doesn't understand our culture, you cannot understand what that means.
This obviously farcical, to put it kindly. This guy talking about something you would have heard on daytime TV in the 90s, that show Crossing Over, where they cold prod the crowd for dead relatives. I have a big problem with making this illegal for a number of reasons. I don't have to tell you how stupid it is. But the big problem here is that you're asking for speech controls instead of just accepting that in a civilized first world nation, there has to be debate and battles of ideas and battles of arguments and some kind of evidentiary standard when it comes to whether or not someone is saying something that is illegal or should be illegal. Where do you come down?
So I was doing a little bit of research on this today, and obviously before. The word denialism has always been a problem for me. I just loathe the word. Although I have said if I ever started another punk rock band, I would call it the Deniers, just because it's a built-in front-loaded slur, right? But in this case, what is denialism? What does it mean, right? So when I first started hearing the term being bandied about, it was in the context of Kamloops. And the original media reports of Kamloops framed it as a genocide. Now, residential school denialism encapsulates now cultural genocide. Okay, separate issue. Let's park it. But we were talking literal genocide, that children were being murdered and buried in unmarked mass graves, which would obviously be a very terrible thing. But then you have to we have to know about it then. That clip said, we don't know what happened and it's unaccountable. It's like, yes, precisely. It's unaccountable. So we have to account for it then. We have to see what's there. And to say that was being called denialism. Now, since then, the meaning's been expanded to mean downplaying the harms, which I don't think anyone is downplaying the harms. I think everyone from across the political spectrum looks at what happened in the residential schools and thinks shit show. It was just kind of probably abysmal conditions and forceful separation from families and no one's making apologies for it. I think what people are saying today is, and this actually comes into the definition of denialism, this tripwires the law if it sort of comes into effect as defined. The people today who are saying bad things happen, but we have to sort of get on with life, and we have to look at, we inform ourselves from the mistakes that we've made in the past. Actually, not we've made in the past. People who are dead before we were ever born made in the past. We have to learn from those mistakes, and we do have to take some account of them and acknowledge them, but we really have to move forward. And this isn't helping anybody. It's not helping people who've been affected by it. It's not helping the descendants of people who've been affected by it. And it's not helping anybody who had nothing to do with it, who's alive today, being constantly told they're an evil person for something that, not even my ancestors did, because my ancestors were in fucking Europe when all this happened. So, to call it denialism, to even throw open the debate on the topic, is just obviously Orwellian, and it's kind of par for the course for Canada.
It's a shame that you're correct on all fronts there, and I'll add two things. One is that it feels to me like the Aboriginal community, there needs to be a line drawn for critics of this whole idea between, Native Canadians, Native, Indian Canadians, I don't know what the term is, and the chiefs and tribe leaders and elders and the sort of political actors, movers and shakers among that population. I suspect that there are not many people living on reserves in Canada today who are a fan of, chiefs and leaders that are on TV making these claims and demanding these things. These are the same people, of course, that extract value from the taxpayer basically any way they can, which is point number two, that it feels to me like this community of leaders realizes they're losing their grip on what was once this sort of surefire cash cow, right? The eternally on one knee Canadian population, flag halfway up the pole. There's I think now a civic holiday in September, right? For Truth and Reconciliation Day. Of course, we are doing the reconciliation. It is the truth that we're now hoping to get, and we're being stonewalled by the people who are receiving a lot of that goodwill and good money from the tax base. I think they realize they're losing their grip. And the reason I say this is because I see it in two places. I see it here where they're demanding criminalization of anything that is dissenting from the narrative, but I also see it in the way they're treating energy all of a sudden. Happy to play ball with pipelines as long as there's a 7-figure sum in it for me. It does look a little bit like the looting of the trough we talk about oftentimes, sort of the downfall of the modern West. Politicians understanding that their grip is not as fail-safe as they thought and trying to take as much money out of the treasury as they can before they leave. I think this is a good example of that. On the side of law and legislation, which is really one of the focuses of Ready, this is going to continue, I think, for the short term, because even though, I was reading a couple of different surveys, and I'll pull one up here, even though a significant majority of the population does not want to submit to this idea that, they are, they're part of this denialism thinking. We have this from Angus Reid here. This, 2/3 of Canadians want additional evidence before accepting that soil anomalies represent unmarked graves. I think that's a fair point, and most Canadians feel this way, even if they don't say it. One of the things that we're trying to do is give people the guts to say these things online, in crowds, at dinner, at school, at work, because it's true that if you don't start standing your ground on what's allowed to be said, even when it's unpopular, the ground is going to slide from underneath you faster and faster as time goes on. We've seen the expansion of hate speech laws. We've seen obviously the expansion of surveillance and monitoring private conversations. And there's obviously an effort here to link these things together. I think the big question for me is how much longer can this go under the sort of the current state of affairs? Our government, I think, having a bit of a hard time continuing to sell this to the Canadian population less and less willing to play ball privately and publicly. And now, in what I would call like just a disastrous PR strategy, you have your political representatives claiming they're receiving messages from the deceased. Like, this can't be the way forward for anyone involved. So I suspect this is probably going to tail off, but it may get worse in the short term, which I think is the thesis for a lot of this stuff from where we sit.
Before it gets better.
Yeah.
This isn't a law yet. And all kinds of privacy and legal and free speech experts have been saying that this is going to come under immediate fire under the charter. If it does, I can't see it surviving the charter challenge because it's basically it's not even nuance. If you look at the existing hate speech laws in Canada, they're pretty clear on what they are, even the modified ones under C9. Like you're basically inciting to violence against an identifiable minority. It's pretty clear what it is, even if you have some quibbles with the expansion of the scope of like, okay, well, what's a protected category now? But downplaying the harms, like, what does that even mean? Like, oh, I don't know, suck it up, buttercup. Okay, you're going to jail right now. It's that's not an enforceable legal boundary. And then going forward to say, we should look forward, not dwell on the past, and calling that a form of denialism. I mean, that's a thought crime then. Now you're talking about a thought crime. It's like, well, you can't think, well, that's what I honestly believe. Well, you can't think that, but I do. Okay, see you in court. Tell it to the judge, right?
Yeah. It's funny, these guys are spending their time entertaining, talking about, probably discussing in back rooms, these types of things. Meanwhile, at the PMO, we're obviously seeing a different side of our leadership. Carney drops $160,000 on airplane food during one trip. I mean, I've had airplane food. I can't imagine that they got $160 worth of flavor for sure. I don't know what they paid for here. I see some skeptics, let's call them, or the coping crowd talking about how this often doesn't, really mean just $160,000 worth of, stale tuna salad or whatever. It's, there's other associated costs with that. But the details are pretty nasty here. And we'll talk about this one first. We have another story shortly after we're finished here. Just, MPPs resigning after booking hotels, and you got this. And that, like I said earlier, it stinks of looting the treasury before things go sideways and you have to take a helicopter out of the smoldering pile of rubble you used to rule over. I'm curious, what do you think about this? Are you on the side of, gallows for this type of spending, or is this something that people are overreacting to?
No, they're not overreacting to it. And, the mantra that I've been repeating lately, and if you follow me on X, I guess you hear me say it a bit too often, is Canada is a griftocracy. I mean, that's literally what it is. It's, your description of just lining up at the trough to siphon it dry before the fraud comes to a screeching halt. When you were talking about a lot of the Indian or the Aboriginal First Nations leadership, the people who are on TV demanding the money and getting the money, and contrasting that with your probably standard average resident of a reserve that probably doesn't ever see any of that money. It reminded me of that meme that you sort of see it, like communist leaders, communist followers, Democrat leaders, Democrat followers, First Nations leaders, First Nations reserve inhabitants. And here we are, like the politicians and the plebs, right? The politicians and the people who vote for them. And we're just seeing it everywhere. There's no accountability. They're narrowing the scope of Freedom of Information Act requests because they just know, like, let's just tighten the nozzle so people just can't get more and more dirt on us, because there's just more and more dirt. It's a free-for-all. Like, you get into office, we see the same thing in the US, you know, where people are actually monetizing Nancy Pelosi stock trackers and other congressmen. And it's just like, yeah, just follow the crowd, man. Just follow the grift. And it's a pretty good strategy in terms of win-loss. And it's everywhere. Right.
The contrast people don't see is that at the same time that your speech is being pried into more and more and more, whether it's private chats or things you say online, you know, anonymous forums, you know, you name it, the powers that be, like you mentioned, there are narrowing the scope of stuff like Information Act requests. They're narrowing the scope of what information even has to be, you know, retained for a certain period of time, right? Like IT retention policy now is just, you know, a thing of the past.
That's such a stark contrast with
it's
Bill,
crazy.
With is it C-22? I got them all mixed up. It's like, we're going to force ISPs to keep your metadata for 3 years. Well, I think they had the clock back at 6 months now, but like our metadata, no, we're deleting that tomorrow. Like, we're not even going to store it. So
that's right. They're not using government issued devices to carry out government work. That's a big no-no in most government offices. Of course, it doesn't matter if you're making the rules. Not to mention that, you know, Blacklocks, Holly Doan has talked about this in the past. When there is a hot button issue, something like COVID, for example, you know, like the rules around vaccines and the research around vaccines and that stuff that I'm sure they weren't alone in trying to get. Yeah, we can meet this request, but we're not going to be able to meet it for 3 years. There's a backlog. And that's unconstitutional in a lot of ways. There's rules around how long an information request can sit, you know, in a queue. What is a reasonable amount of time for someone to receive an information request? And then on top of that, when you think about the way that these guys clearly now are in bed with, you know, agents from different, I don't want to say different parties, but agents from different walks of life. So for example, Carney's PMO just hired a Democratic operative in a new position, you know, a chief of something. I forget what it was. Like, it's sort of a COO. Officer, yeah, COO type role. And it's like, okay, you know, where did she, like, obviously you guys have done business on behalf of this country when you were an advisor and she was a Democratic operative, and now you're the PM and here she is at your side. Like, what was the nature of that relationship going in? And I think people, for the most part, the most frustrating thing, whether it's the background of this woman who's a COO now, whether it's the airline food, or whether it's the change in the way that your information is stored and viewed in terms of its privacy, no one knows, Mark. Like you know, we talk to the Ready.ca people on the forum, and they're chatting amongst themselves. And we're obviously doing like the channel now and the podcast, and it's like when you tell people this stuff, it's amazing how many people you think would know don't know. You and I gave a talk last year at the Bitcoin conference, you know, talking about some of these bills when they were still in vitro. And I think one of us asked, like, how many people knew about this stuff before we talked about it? And the room is like 1/3 full. These are people who are the most terminally online you can possibly be in a silo that is directly adjacent to some of the problems caused here and some of the concerns you might have around privacy of financial transactions. For example, if you're a Bitcoiner, they didn't know. And so when you look at like the broader public, it's just completely lost on them. And one of the things we're trying to do is make sure that, number one, this isn't lost on you, but number two, you know how to protect your information, your data. You know, you have the tools and the know-how to figure this stuff out. Because on the other side, you know, we're not going to talk too much about it today, but the government's testing digital wallets now. Like, what is that? You know, that's the last thing we'll cover today, but we'll get into that in a bit. I want to talk a little bit more about resource wasting here. Stan Cho staying in hotels 6 blocks from his home, it looks like. Tough way for your wife to find out you're cheating. You told her you were overseas and racking up hotels, calling her from the Ritz. Turns out you were at the Marriott by the airport. Tough look there. Marit Stiles, the NDP leader, calling for she NDP or Liberal, I forget now, but irrelevant in any case. It's going to be Doug Ford's province for the rest of my life, probably. These guys are spending money they don't have, and somebody found the receipt here. I don't know if it'll be in this story, but there was a Queen's Park correspondent who tweeted out this, insane amount of money spent by everyone and their brother, including, by the way, Ford's nephew Michael, who was also on the list, at about a $10,000 expenditure that was unexplained or was full of booze and partying or whatever. It's your money, man. They get to spend it, but you're the one who's got to pay it.
Yeah. Griftocracy. That's just what I'm murmuring over and over every time I see this. And this is provincial, and the Carney, private jet thing or, airplane food thing was federal. I'm sure if we dig into the municipal, we see all kinds of, just waste and grift. It's baked into the system, right? And you hear stories from, people who witnessed the collapse of the Soviet Union in the Eastern Bloc countries, and they talked about how the entire system became so corrupt with the authorities toward the end that they had a word for it, and it was called the bezel, right? And the bezel was sort of like, well, what is the bribery component of the economic value of this transaction to make it actually occur, and that's like, so what's the bezel like on this deal? That's what politics are now, except it might not be outright cash payments. It could be benefits. It's just lavish accommodations. That's why Klaus Schwab was outed from the WEF, right? I mean,
That's
he
right.
took it even a step further, got some happy ending rub and tugs in the hotel rooms that he was charging to the organization. It's just these people, our betters from on high, really do believe that they're kind of a cut above and entitled to this sort of exalted existence at everybody else's expense. They earn it in their mind. That's got to be how they think about this kind of thing.
Yeah, the language around Cho specifically was special circumstances, right, for the hotel stays in the area, which kind of tells you everything you need to know. Number one, that there's even a designation for expenses that falls under that, as though you can do basically whatever you want if the circumstance is special. I don't know who determines that. But number two, that you would use it to stay, 7 blocks or whatever from your riding. Again, big apology to Mrs. Cho. Tough way to.
I know. Tough way to find out.
Because it's got to be what it is. Like I cannot imagine any other circumstance where you would prefer to stay in a hotel than at your own home. I don't want to speculate here. And God knows these people are litigious. So
total speculation, but it's either he's doing it he's got something on the side nearby the house, or she figured out he has something on the side. It's like and it was better than the couch, right?
I guess it is a special circumstance.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about the last story here. Again, from Holly Doan over at Blacklocks. Government quietly testing digital ID. Now, the most impressive part of this whole story is that they managed to find a picture of the Parliament building where it's not under construction, surrounded in scaffolding. I've been to Ottawa a few times in the last few years, and every single time it's like a disgusting mess of construction work. So, Cabinet's been quietly testing digital ID apps on an experimental basis. This according to reporting from Blacklocks and the person in the department and Department of Employment, I should say. So they continue to say that no digital ID is in the works or coming down the pipe. I think you and me would probably disagree with that. And just to add one other bit of information here, I'll pull up an article from our friend Michael Geist, who talked about this back in January, saying that governments, again, were claiming they had no plans to issue national ID, no plans for digital ID services, none of that stuff. And here we are now almost 8 months later. And what do we see? We see them continuing to go down this road where, again, from the ready sovereignty, sort of sovereign and stable angle, you need to have at your disposal ways to not participate in the digital panopticon. They're fewer and further between than ever before, whether it's your computer, your phone, and now even maybe your digital wallet, as you see here. One of the things we're going to try and do over the next little while is build out this sort of suite of products, services, recommendations that we're behind, and our trusted friends of ours are behind to try and help with this. Because let's face it, Mark, the government is interested in one thing and one thing only, and it is not your privacy. It is the opposite. They want complete and total transparency. I think there's been a mask off moment recently in France vis-a-vis the EU, the DAC 8 legislation, where the government of France is requiring all Bitcoin and crypto exchanges to report every person's buy and sell transactions, regardless of size, regardless of anything. If you look at the legislative page for that bit of law, there is no longer anything about terrorist financing, child trafficking, none of that. It says explicitly that the hope here is to make sure that these people are paying their taxes because we think they are evading them and we need that money. Mm-hmm. So, when I look at this legislation, that legislation, the digital ID, I think it all comes together pretty cleanly, in my view.
Yeah. In the bigger picture, digital ID is inevitable, no matter how you slice it. Even the idea that, we're going to continue to walk around carrying these, laminated plastic paper cards in our wallet is kind of laughable. But there's, and whenever we talk about this, I say there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do digital ID. In fact, Bitcoin, the Bitcoin world, the crypto punks, even the, the cypher punks, even the crypto kitties are ahead on this matter, because like Nostr, a Nostr ID, a NIP5 ID, that's a digital ID, right? Mm-hmm. It's decentralized and it's private, and it's more like an attestation than opening your life up to whatever. And so there are ways to do this on a need to know basis. And I don't think the government's going to do any of that. They're going to just, no, we want digital ID. We want it tied to a central database, and we want it to be trackable across all facets of your existence. And, all of these sort of disclaimers or protestations from the government that we're not really planning this, and it's going to be voluntary. I mean, that's exactly what they said about the vaccine mandates, right? They said, oh, we don't want to polarize. We don't want to divide Canadians. It's going to be purely voluntary. There's not going to be mandates. Hey, guess what? There's mandates.
Let me stop you there, because there's actually a better example, and the vaccine is a good one, because what did they say? The government's actual position on the vaccine was that there was no mandates. You just couldn't work if your employer wanted you to get that vaccine. Couldn't travel, couldn't go to the store, couldn't go to the gym. Starmer in the UK, you don't have to get the digital ID, but you won't be able to work here if you don't have it. Like that, yeah. They always deputize industry. They're sort of arm's length goons to make sure that this is enforced as a mandate without actually legally imposing one, right? So anyway, continue.
Exactly right. But so it's the famous Bismarck line, right? Like, never believe anything until the government has officially denied it twice or three times, right? So digital ID, absolutely 100% coming, which leads us to central bank digital currencies, which we know are absolutely 100% coming. Did I talk about it last week or on a different show? I've got like thousands and thousands of pages from a Freedom of Information request from the Bank of Canada on central bank digital currencies. It's a few years old now, but it was before AI, so I haven't really put anything on it to sort of dig through all these files and see what's in there. But that would be interesting to look at. So it's all coming, and it's what I talk about a lot, the great bifurcation, right? There's going to be UBI, which is going to be implemented on CBDC rails, which is going to be administered via digital ID. And that's the panopticon. There will be alternatives, and we're going to do our best to keep our viewership and our readers appraised of them. You know, there's sovereign money like Bitcoin. There are like decentralized messaging systems that people are using, and there are ways to do this. It's going to cost more to do things in a decentralized, privacy enhanced way. There's going to be this privacy premium in the future. You know, that I call it repricing sovereignty in the era of mass compliance. Like, that's where we're headed, because most people are going to be completely on board with this. That's the other thing. Everyone's going to be fine. Yeah, I don't care. You know, I don't care if I've got a carbon footprint limit every month. It's good for the environment, isn't it? So.
I look forward to trying to purchase carbon points off of somebody when I have to have a dinner party and make more than 3 or 4 steaks. I'll need them. I don't know. Maybe you'll sell me yours at face value if you're not using them. Anyway, let's get out of here. Thank you everyone for listening and watching. Don't forget to join us, the ranks of the less than thrilled with all these things. Ready.ca. I'll come up with a better tagline than that in the future. But free to sign up, obviously. Yeah, free to sign up. Lots of quality people there, high HC Canadians who are looking at this stuff much the same way we are, probably much the same way you are, and saying, I want out, but I don't want to leave, you know? So we're working on that. Mark, any closing thoughts here before we wrap?
I don't know. For some reason, just the thought, get your pal, popped into my head. And so I'm going to just say that.
Do that. Good idea. Good idea. We'll see you next week, everybody.
All right.